Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I've got a fantastic guest for you today, Chris Scott from Boston, and he's going to talk to us about fixing execution debt to restore focus, profit, and team momentum. And I'm really happy to have him on to talk about helping scaling businesses. And for the business audience, he's the man. Chris, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, so, briefly introduce yourself and we'll dive right into it.
Yeah, so my name's Chris Scott. As you said, I coined, I suppose, the phrase execution debt. So I primarily work with small to medium-sized businesses to help find and fix their execution debt. Execution debt is the cost of all of the inefficiencies and wasted execution and delays that exist in your business. Every business owner has this. I have it. Chris, I'm sure you have it. No business is perfect. So whether you're an early stage entrepreneur or a founder just looking to launch, or whether even as you scale into small and medium-sized growth, this exists in every business. So very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be discussing this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're gonna dive right into it. And so when you mentioned execution debt, what does execution debt look like? You defined it, and what does it look like, feel, and how to spot it in your business?
Great question. So it's the silent killer of businesses. So some of it is more obvious than others, but it compounds over time. So it can look as something as simple as wasted profits because maybe APAR, like you're not receiving payments in time or something like that. Execution exists in solving the wrong problem. So let's say you think you have a problem in your business and you spend time, money, resources chasing a solution and it turns out to not be the proper solution. That's execution debt. Execution debt also exists from a more perhaps subjective and team morale perspective. So, it's the poor handoffs. It's meetings that don't make sense and fill up your calendar. And it's the low value work that doesn't move the needle. So some of it is tangible. From a process improvement perspective, we can certainly measure some of it tangibly, but there's also an intangible aspect as well. So again, it exists in every business and it can compound very quickly. Again, I'll give an example myself as a small business owner. An example of execution debt that I recently came across was I put together an assessment that I actually think we linked to in the show notes that anyone can take to help identify the execution debt that exists in their business. And what I found myself doing was overdeveloping. So I had this concept of, hey, what if we could measure execution debt in businesses, right? And so I put together this quiz, and me just being an excited business owner, I was like, I'm going to automate it and I'm going to build email nurtures and follow-ups and everything. It's going to be the Rolls Royce and it's going to be great. And I caught myself thinking, no, that's execution debt, right? Instead, let's do a minimum viable product, a minimum viable execution, and let's release it. So I put the link together, released it. And then if people start using it, which fortunately they have, then that's feedback to me of, okay, this is something that I should invest time in scaling. Now I can go build in some of those efficiencies and whatnot. So again, execution debt would have been building this full scale product without knowing whether or not it was going to work. And maybe it would have, and I would have gotten lucky. But as I'm sure you're aware, for every strategy and product that works, there's 9 or 10 that don't work. And if you're not careful, that time and money and effort that goes into those not successful solutions, it adds up. And, especially for early stage companies, execution debt, the margins are so thin, right? Because there's not much room for error. I saw an article recently that Apple, I think, is spending $1 billion or losing $1 billion a year on Apple TV Plus. Apple has a lot of room for execution debt. They can make those strategic decisions, but for early stage growth companies, so if I had $1 billion to waste, I would love to be able to do that, but I don't. I have to be much more careful about maximizing my value and minimizing those inefficiencies.
Yeah, so we talked about your framework for SBI3 and your diagnostics driven approach. And so a lot of business owners, they overcomplicate execution. And so you have a 3-step method to strengthen your business. Talk about that.
Sure. So as I mentioned, execution debt is the inefficiencies in your business. And like I said, solving the wrong problem often leads to a lot of inefficiencies. So it's easier said than done, but the SBI 3 framework is based on 3 pillars: innovate, implement, and improve. So the first step is to innovate. And what that means is make sure we're solving the right problem. So the first thing we need to do is pause. And again, it's easier said than done. We're all naturally inclined to jump in and want to test solutions and go. So it's very counterintuitive to want to pause and take a step back. But that's the first thing we need to do. And the reason for that is if we don't do that, we find ourselves in firefighting mode. We're very reactive and we're constantly putting out fires. It's a very fine line between strategy and chaos, right? So constant reacting, and this happened and go react, and this happened and go react. That's firefighting, and that you'll find yourself chasing, again, low value things. So we want to focus on the high value things that move the needle. So that's where Innovate comes in. So the first step is to, again, pause and make sure we're solving the right problem and innovate potential solutions. A tool that I love for this is the 5 whys, and that helps us get to the root cause of the problem. I'm sure you've heard of that, and much of the audience has heard of that. So an example is a local cafe, right? So a local cafe that I've been fortunate enough to work with came to me and said, hey, sales are down. And so the natural first step, inclination, is to go run a marketing campaign or go maybe a sales offer, like a buy one, get one coffee after 2 p.m. But we worked together and okay, let's pause and let's maybe get to the root of the problem. So we dig deeper in. Why are sales down? Because our regulars have stopped coming in. Why have regulars stopped coming in? Because our wait times have gotten longer. Why have the wait times gotten longer? Because we hire new baristas and they don't know how to use the equipment. Holy cow, we thought we had a sales problem, but now we realize we just have a training problem. That's very fixable. So then from there, we innovate solutions. Okay, how can we train our baristas to help improve wait times? And then we go implement that. When we implement it, like I said, execution debt is wasting time and money and resources on solutions that we don't know work. So before we scale efficiencies, we have to make sure that the solution works. So we do what I call it, again, a minimum viable execution. I like to challenge myself and the clients I work with. How quickly can we test this, right? How quickly can we test this? I think a lot of times we get sucked into, much like the example I gave with the quiz, we think it's got to do this and it's got to have automate. No, bare bones. How quickly can we test and get feedback on if our solution works? I think that most businesses can actually test in 24 to 48 hours, right? Let's go test it. And then from there, we get instant feedback. An analogy that I've liked recently is Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers talks about it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert, right? And in my mind, each one of those hours must be earned. So there's no shortcuts. There's no fast forwarding all the way to the end. You have to earn every single one of those hours and every single one of those reps. And again, if you don't, then that's execution debt. So we go test solutions. We test small, we fail small, we get instant feedback, and then we improve and we think, okay, did this work? If it did work, do we want to scale it into the business and how can we make it even better? And if it didn't work, okay, let's go back and let's try again. And I think that it's really a mindset, right? It's that continuous improvement mindset of how can we make this better? How can we make this better for the company, for our customers, and adopting that mindset, I think is just a true game changer.
Interesting. And the next question I have for you is basically you talk about this idea that businesses keep solving the same problems over and over again and teams getting stuck in firefighting mode. How do you break out of this?
Yeah, again, I think that's a very common problem is we see something and we go react and then, well, we solved that problem today. And then you wake up the next day and you have your coffee and everything's going well. And I come from a project management background. So I've been on projects where everything feels like firefighting and it's like it kills morale. And that's what execution that I've said kills morale because you go into each day of what's today's problem going to be. So again, I think it might seem counterintuitive, but it's really pausing and addressing what is the real root problem and how can we solve the real root problem? Another framework or frame of mind perhaps that I like is the 10,000 hour or the $10,000 rule, right? So if a high value, let's say you we're fortunate enough to bring a big four consultancy into your small business and they're charging you $10,000 an hour, but it's worth it, right? What is the one problem that consultant would go fix for $10,000 an hour? That's the problem you should be fixing, right? Ignore the noise. I think another one is the Pareto principle, right? Where 80% of our outputs come from 20%. Did I say that backwards? Yeah, our Pareto principle, our high value work. It's you want to make sure that you're moving the needle and doing the high value work. So from teams and everything, it's making sure that you're solving the right problem and taking the time to address the root cause.
Yeah. And another follow-up question I have for you is when with this, you talk about this idea of if business owners, they're listening to this and they want to solve execution debt, what is one thing that they could do right away today to help move them on that path?
Yeah, I work with clients all the time. So selfishly, I would say take the execution debt assessment. Again, it should be linked in the show notes. And I think that's a great start. You'll get a follow-up email that shows the areas where you're perhaps most losing and lacking in execution debt. But outside of that, again, I think it's identifying the bottlenecks and the inefficiencies that are most impacting your business. And again, where the $10,000 an hour rule, what are the three things that you can solve today that would most move the needle in your business? Ignore the rest. Everyone, again, it's easy to fall into the trap, myself included. It's easy to want the perfectly polished branding statement and website and all of that stuff is absolutely important. But again, what is the high value thing that's moving the needle? So taking a step back and again, assessing what are the three most high leverage things that I can do now to most move the needle in my business. And then again, let's go solve them and let's go solve the root cause. Again, don't just jump at like the surface level solution. Take time to really dig into the problem and go investigate solutions to the root cause.
Yeah. And what is in the context of scaling execution? Because we didn't really touch upon this, but what is the difference between direction versus motion when you're talking about scaling?
Yeah, execution debt is something that, like I said, exists in every business. And it's another trap that I've seen businesses fall into is that you think that scaling eliminates execution debt, but it doesn't. It masks it. And so scaling just masks and grows your inefficiencies. They're still there, right? So it's easy to think, oh, I'll hire one more person and then I'll fix this problem. It doesn't if you're not already efficient and streamlined. And a lot of times it compounds the problem because now you have another perhaps persona like in your team and more meetings and onboarding and training. So all of these other dynamics, again, it's important that when we're scaling, we want to make sure that, again, it's smart and controlled. Like I said, it's a very fine line between strategy and chaos. So I think that's the biggest difference is it's very easy to get in this, well, I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll do this. That's a very chaotic environment. We always want to make sure we're working towards our North Star, right? Or our vision. Personally, I believe that obviously every business owner has a vision, but vision without proper execution is just wasted potential. And I really believe that every business deserves a chance to thrive and to see their company fulfill its potential. So in terms of scaling and momentum and direction, we want to make sure that we're always moving towards, again, our North Star and our why. I think that's a really good way to frame a lot of potential solutions too. I mentioned test small, fail small, but to bring it back to the cafe example, maybe we tested a solution with training and it worked, right? And our wait times decreased. We're like, okay, we think we want to scale this into the business. It's perhaps a good checkpoint to think, does this still serve our why? And again, that why is going to vary for every business owner. It could be you have a side hustle and you just want to make some money on the side, and that's a great why. But any decision you make should be in service of that why. Your why could be you run a nonprofit and you want to help your community. Also a great why. Every decision you make should be in service of that why. So I think that's a really good touch point is making sure that growth is very controlled and very strategic and always in service of the North Star and the why.
I love that. And so for the audience listening to business owners, entrepreneurs, and they want to learn more about execution debt, SBI 3, and scaling their businesses, how can people contact you, follow you, reach out to you? And also, you help COOs run a friction scan on their own businesses without getting overwhelmed? How can they learn from that?
Yeah. So in the show notes, like I said, we have the execution debt assessment. So that's a free assessment. It takes maybe 2 minutes, and you can run through your own business. And I ask 10 or so questions, and I'll send you a personalized email back of where I think execution debt might exist in your business. I love having these conversations. Again, thank you very much for having me on. I love having these conversations with business owners. So on my LinkedIn, I believe my LinkedIn is in the show notes as well. I'd be more than happy to engage. And I love just hearing the problems that business owners are having. I love helping to solve them. Like I said, I think every business owner deserves a chance to thrive. And if I can do my small part to help with that. So I encourage you, take the assessment. I have a newsletter that we can get you involved with as well, but follow me on LinkedIn. I'd love to engage more on LinkedIn. And again, like you said, the COOs and the friction scan, just another tool that I offer to more medium-sized businesses to, again, really run through from a process efficiency standpoint and process mind mapping standpoint to try and iron out some of those
Excellent.
inefficiencies.
Yeah, really great work, and I really enjoyed talking with you, and I think the audience will really resonate with your message, and keep it up.
Yeah, likewise. And congratulations to you, Chris, as well, because you have some big news. I believe you launched your newsletter just recently, correct? I think I saw that in my email box yesterday. Is that correct?
Yeah, we got a growing email list, and we're adding more value through newsletters and community, and so yeah, it's been wonderful.
That's so cool to hear. I was very excited knowing that we were chatting today. I was excited to see that in my inbox yesterday. Very cool what you're doing for your community. And thank you very much for having me and inviting me into your community and hopefully engage with a lot of the audience. Again, execution debt score. Happy to engage on LinkedIn. And again, thank you very much for accepting me into your community.
And I really enjoyed talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you very much for having me.